on 147a, Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, and the Gemara is talking about various cases of wearing a talis, which is essentially their head covering that came over their toes and shoulders. It was sort of like a poncho, and if you pull it up over your shoulders, you carry it and you're wearing it in that abnormal way, it would count as carrying it. And there was various forms of that in sellers of clothing and so on. And so we're up to about 15 lines in Vaharatanim, which Rashi says is people from a certain place. Tues says it's runners, people who would run from place to place, and therefore they would carry their garments folded up to give them easier time running. So since this is the normal way for this group of people, whether it's a place or a profession, so Yotze B'Sudur and Shal Kaspeim, they can go out with their head coverings and cloth and kerchiefs that go down to their shoulders, and not hanging over their arms and off to the side. And it's not only these people, whether it's a group of people, or whether it's a town or a job, because really everybody can wear it that way. It is a normal way of wearing it, and therefore would not count as carrying. But it is typical for such people to go out that way. So we use them as an example. Rabbi Yehuda said, Hurkanus, the son of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, he wore his kerchief, his head kerchief that would go down the sides of his arms as well, but he had it folded up on the shoulder. But he had one corner wound up on his finger, so this way it won't fall off, and that was also sort of like wearing it on the rest of the body. And when this story came before the Chachamim, they said, but he didn't need to have it tied around his finger for Shabbos, because for Shabbos, just having it on the shoulders is also going to be okay. Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Chisda, said in the name of Rav Chisda, indeed, that is the halacha, that this counts as a typical form of wearing it, and therefore it's not considered carrying it in an abnormal way. Wearing it in an abnormal way, which counts as if he's carrying it in a public domain. Ula had the occurrence of being at the house of Isi Barhini. So they wanted to know, can somebody make a marzev? Essentially, a marzev is a gutter. And then later the Gemara is going to tell us that this marzev was, they would cuff up their long cloak, and had sort of like a drawstring to bring it up, and it sort of made a bubble at the bottom, and they would do so either because it looked better, or because they can use it as a pocket, or because they could move faster. So we'll see a difference in that. So and they said in the name of Rabbi Lai, you may not. My marzev, and what is this marzev? These are Babylonian cuffs, which, as I mentioned, the long cloak folded up and a drawstring to keep it folded up, and that would be prohibited, because that's really not a beautiful thing. It's not out of beauty, and so it's like you have an extra garment there that you're carrying, and it's an abnormal way. So Rabbi Yirmiyah, who's sitting in front of Rabbi Zera, asked a specific question. He said, what happens if it's folded up this much? It's still prohibited. And he showed him a different way. What about if I folded it up this way? It's still prohibited. So our Papa said, here's the rule that you need to know. If you're trying to fold it up in order to make a pocket to always keep it that way, prohibited. That's going to be an excess piece of cloth, and it's going to be prohibited. Called the list noise, sorry, but if it's just making it look more beautiful right now, that's going to be permissible. Like Rav Shisha Breda of Idi, that even on a weekday he would just pull up his garment in this way in order to make it look beautiful. So therefore, for sure, on Shabbos you're allowed to do it as well. It doesn't count as carrying, because it is a nice way of wearing such a garment. Kiyasar of Dimi. When Rav Dimi came, and as we mentioned many times, Rav Dimi would travel back and forth from Eretz Israel between the academies teaching the halacha from one another. All's well. Everything okay there? Okay. Kiyasar Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, Amar, he said, Pam Achas, a certain time, Yatza Rebbe Lasada. Rebbe went out to a field. And he walked out with the two sides of his garment thrown over his shoulder. So whereas it should be really enveloping him, he had the back of it covering his torso, but the sides were over his shoulder, sort of like the way we commonly wear a talis. Rabbi Meir's brother-in-law, the son of Rabbi Meir's father-in-law, whose name was Yeshua ben Zirus, the son said to Rebbe, Bezula Chiv Rabbi Meir, did not Rabbi Meir say about this that would be a Torah prohibition? This is a respectful way of correcting someone who is a Talmud Chacham. And the Gemara tells elsewhere that when somebody corrects their parent or a Talmud Chacham, you wouldn't say, hey, that's wrong thing to do, but rather would question, is this not the case that Rabbi Meir said is a Torah prohibition? That's the way he did so. So he was challenging Rebbe and reminding him that this prohibited by saying, is not this the case that Rabbi Meir said that there's a Torah prohibition and you have to bring a sin offering for doing it? Amalei diktik Rabbi Meir adkan. Rabbi Meir was exact. This is what he said is prohibited. If I fold it up this way, not that way. This can't be. This is a particular, this must be permissible because after all, it's covering my torso and I just pulled up the sides. So Rebbe could not believe that that's really something Rabbi Meir says prohibited. Shilsha Rebbe Talisa, but nevertheless, Rebbe let the sides down. Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, so remember Rav Dimi used to travel back and forth from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel to tell these halachas, and when Ravin as well. So Rav Dimi told that story. Ravin, when he came, he said the story like this. Amar, Leir Yeshua ben Zirus have it. It's not correct. It wasn't Yeshua ben Zirus, Rabbi Meir's brother-in-law. Ella Yeshua ben Kafusai. Oh yeah. Rather, it was a different Yeshua, Yeshua ben Kafusai, who was the son-in-law of Rabbi Akiva, Chasna Shel Rabbi Akiva. Amar Bezule Chiev Rabbi Akiva Chatas, and he challenged Rabbi by asking, did not Rabbi Akiva, my father-in-law, prohibit this and say that it's a Torah prohibition and you bring a sin offering for doing it on Shabbos? Amar Le Dikta Rabbi Akiva Adkat, and he challenged, Rabbi said, wait, Rabbi Akiva prohibited even this. This is such an obvious thing that should be permissible, but nevertheless, Shilsha Rebbe Talisai, nevertheless, he pulled down the sides. Kiyasar of Shmuel Bar Yehuda, when Shmuel Bar Yehuda came from the Israel to the Babylonian academies, he said, Amar Nishal Itmar. Actually, the teaching I learned was that this wasn't an actual occurrence, but rather Rebbe asked the question, and that's the responses that he got. In any case, it seems that the halacha would be that that it is not a typical way of wearing a talis on your shoulders, this sudar, and therefore it would be considered carrying in a public domain. As we mentioned on Friday morning, however, since nowadays this is a typical way for us to wear a talis, to throw it over the shoulders, so that would count as a normal way of wearing the garment and would not count as carrying. The Mishnah. Somebody who bathed in cave water. So basically, this is water that was warmed before Shabbos in a cave, and because it's in a cave, it retains some of its heat. Omei Tiberia, or in the natural hot springs of Tiberias. Venestapik, and then he dries himself off. Even if he used 10 towels, he should not bring them back by hand because we're concerned that he's going to squeeze out whatever water is in there, and that would be a prohibition of schita, of squeezing out. We saw that could be cleaning, it could be extracting a liquid from a solid. Either way, don't do that. You can't do it on Shabbos, and therefore don't bring the towel back because you may end up doing that. But 10 people are allowed to wipe themselves with one towel. They used to, typically when they would wash their hands, face, and feet. So that's what he's talking about, but really it could be the entire body as well. So they can all use the same towel, even though by that point the towel will be drenched. and we're not concerned you're going to squeeze out the towel. And you can carry it. And the Gemara is going to explain, because people will remind each other, don't squeeze it. But when you're a single person, even though you have 10 towels, which are less likely to be wet, nevertheless, there's a concern and you can't bring them back. You're allowed to take oils and massage on Shabbos. But you're not allowed to do this called amlin. Now, amlin, according to Rashi, it means a very strong massage, to really rub hard. Tues says masamlin means a form of, Rabbi Hanan says that it's a form of exercise, stretching and back and forth. So you can't do that on Shabbos because these are medicinal, and we're afraid you're going to make a potion for it. You also may not, and this is the text that we have. We'll see later in the Gemara that there's some of the text changes. You're not allowed to scrub and scratch off skin and dry skin or calluses. You can't go down to this particular river called Kordima. You're not allowed to make a potion which induces vomiting. You're also not allowed to wrap a child, a newborn, to bring his bones into shape. And if somebody has a broken bone, you may not put it back in place. And somebody who's dislocated a joint, either hand or foot, you're not allowed to soak him in cold water, which was a form that they had of tightening the muscles and therefore pulling it back in place. But he's allowed to just bathe himself in cold water, and if it gets back in place, so be it. So in our Mishnah, the Tiberias waters, which are natural hot springs, will juxtaposed and put together with Meima'ara, a cave water. So my Tveria chamin, just as those are hot, so too Av Meima'ara chamin, so too the waters for the cave are also going to be hot. So it's the evidence, and there it said, and yet it says only if he did wash himself like this, so then he's allowed to use a towel but not bring it back, etc. But he's not allowed to do it. Lechatchila means he's not allowed to bathe himself or wash himself with a warm water on Shabbos. Mechlal, and now we turn the page to Kufim Zayin Amid Beis. But to pour water over his body would be permissible, even with warm water. Mani, whose opinion is that? Rabbi Shimon, this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So one should not, different Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that a person may not bathe himself or even pour water over himself. Regardless of whether it's hot or cold water. Rabbi Shimon Matir. Rabbi Shimon says you may pour water over yourself on Shabbos, but whether it's cold or hot. Rabbi Yehuda, however, hot water is prohibited, cold water is permissible. And our Mishnah, this text that we just saw, seems to indicate that you're allowed to pour hot water over yourself, even hot water. And that would be the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And as we saw, we have a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Meir, whether it's totally prohibited, totally permissible to pour water over yourself, or as Rabbi Yehuda said, it depends between hot water is prohibited, cold water is going to be permissible. A person can dry himself even with 10 towels. However, he may not carry it back. So Reisha, Rabusa Kamashmalan, that's teaching us a special halacha. And then it said, and if 10 people use one towel, they may bring it back. V'seifa Rabusa Kamashmalan, that too is teaching us a chiddush, a new idea. Reisha Rabusa Kamashmalan, the first one is teaching us that a Rabusa, a new idea that it's permissible, it's prohibited, even though there's not a lot of people using it, meaning only one person used it. So there's not a lot of water in there. The Lenafisha still, yet, Kiva Nachadhu, since he's alone, he may forget and he squeeze out the towel to dry it, and Asil de Schita, and he's going to transgress the prohibition of Schita, and as we mentioned before, that could be because he's extracting a liquid from a solid, or on account of that he's cleaning the towel. The same for Abu Sakamash Malan, and the end is teaching us a chiddush like this: Afila hani than afishi bahu. Even if 10 people use the same towel, so there is more water in there. and therefore the towel is probably full of water. We're not concerned that you're going to do schita because since there's a lot of people there, you will remind each other, oh, by the way, Shabbos, don't squeeze. A person may take a towel and dry themselves on Shabbos and then leave it at the window of the bathhouse or whatever it is. But don't give it to the custodian of the bathhouse because we're concerned that they actually do often just squeeze it out in order to make it more dry so that they can give it to the next person. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon says he can bring one towel and he can carry it back to his house. This concern that our Mishnah said that he can't carry it back on account that we're afraid that he's going to squeeze it out. Rabbi Shimon says no such concern. You can take it back home. People are going to remember and not going to squeeze it. What is the halacha? We have Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan. They all say the same thing, that you're allowed to bring the towel back. And we're not concerned you're going to squeeze it out. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon that we just said, who said that you're allowed to take it back, and we're not concerned, even a single person, we're not concerned you're going to squeeze it. Rebbe, where's Rebbe's case? The time we learned Brisa. Amar Rebbe said to Kashina, Rabbi Shimon, when we were studying Torah at the Academy of Rabbi Shimon B'Takoa, in this place, Tekoa, we would carry, because Rabbi Shimon holds, and we saw this, that many private domains have one halachic status. We saw machlokas about that. The courtyard and the roof, both of them have halachic of a private domain, but they're different functions. Do they count as one private domain that you're allowed to carry from the courtyard to the roof and from the roof, etc., to a karpef, which is a wood storage area? Or do we say, no, that you can only carry what's in the courtyard within the courtyard and what's on the roof within the roof? So Rabbi Shimon says you're allowed to carry from one to the other. So Rabbi said when we were students at Rabbi Shimon's academy, we would carry towels and oil from the courtyard to the roof and from the roof to the karpef until we got to a spring. We go through private domain and within all this halachic place that you're allowed to carry from one private domain to the other in the categories like he just said, and all the way to the spring, and we'd wash ourselves in the spring. And so, and if he brought the towel there, clearly he would bring it back as well. So you see that even a wet towel, a single person can bring it back. Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, the Amar Rabbi Shmuel, as Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, that a person can use a towel and bring it back home. Rabbi Yochanan, where's Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan, similarly, he said, the halacha is a person can use a towel, and can bring it back home by hand. So Gemara's challenges, really? Is that what Rabbi Yochanan said? We have a general rule. Rabbi Yochanan says, and we've seen this many times already, and we'll see it many times to come. Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that an unattributed Mishnah is set halacha. If that's the case, our Mishnah, which is unattributed, said that you may not bring the towel back because it's too wet and we're afraid you're going to squeeze it. And yet you're telling me in the name, Rabbi Barabba is telling me that in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the halacha is that you may bring it back. That's a contradiction in teachings. We learned even if you use 10 separate towels, meaning that each one's not that damp, nevertheless you may not bring it back. So Gemara says, actually, the text by Rabbi Yochanan of that Mishnah was not unattributed. It was attributed to Ben Chakinai. Amar Rabbi Barabba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, name Rabbi Yochanan. Lairim Evian Balore Nashim Lebeibani. The custodians of the bathhouses, they would bring these cloths, finer towels essentially, for women to wash themselves, to dry themselves. And he can carry it to the bathhouse if he's wearing it sort of like a shawl. As long as he covers himself, his head, and most of his body with it. Saknisa, which is a large kerchief, and would also be wrapped around the head and shoulders. The bottom two ends have to be tied together so that it counts like it's wrapped around the body. In the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and it has to be wrapped around below the shoulders, below the arms. Rava said to Bnei Mechuzah, which was a wealthy group of people in this place, Mechuzah, and they had these fancy clothes. When you bring clothing to the soldiers, which was an obligation they had to do and to fulfill, make sure to tie it around below your arms so that it counts as if you're wearing it. The Mishnah had said further that you can bring oils and do oil and massage on Shabbos. You're allowed to massage. Somebody has a bellyache, they would massage their belly with oils and this massage, and it's allowed to be done on Shabbos, even though we saw that you can't do medicinal things on Shabbos unless it's enough of an ailment that would cause somebody sort of to change their routine and go to bed. But if a mild discomfort, you're not allowed to fix on Shabbos on account of that you may come to make a potion. Nevertheless, this, even though it's mild, is allowed to be done. However, you have to do it differently than you would do it during a week. So what do you do on Shabbos that's different than a weekday? So on a weekday, you would first massage and then put oils on. And so therefore on Shabbos, you first put on the oils and then massage. However, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that would still be a weekday form of doing it. Rather, you have to put massage together with the oils all at once. So put oil on your hand and then start the massage, and that will help. And that's allowed to be done because it's being done simultaneous. Avalon misalmin, but you're not allowed to do this amlin. And we mentioned Rashi says that it's a form of remedy, sort of warming oneself up, or it's a exercise. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan asalamed b'karkiyasa shel duyumas duyumsas. You're not allowed to stand in the on the bottom of this particular springs, which was like either a hot springs or the mud at the bottom had some sort of sulfur in it, and that would cause the body to warm, and it acted like a massage and like a exercise, and therefore was prohibited on Shabbos because it was umarpe, because it heals. The entirety of this stream, of this diumsis hot spring that was medicinal, is a total of 21 days. And Shavuos, the holiday Shavuos, was a part of those 21 days. The Atzeres, this Shavuos, was at the beginning of the days or the end of the days? In other words, did it start about Shavuos time and go on into the summer, or did it start about Pesach time and after Pesach and go into an end around Shavuos time? Well, we know that Shmuel says that all medicinal liquids, so such as streams and spring water and all these healthy stuff that they would do, was from Pesach to Shavuos, from the shechting of the carbon until Shavuos. So you're seeing that malud. So you see that Shavuos was the end of this spring. So Gemara says, Dilma Hasam the Kameh Karar Alma Mali. Maybe there with the liquids, the drinking and stuff, that's because the cooler the season is, the better it is for it. But over here, it's a hot spring. It's something that makes the body warmer. That's actually better, and the summer would be better for it. The hotter the atmosphere is, the better it is for it. Mali. This wine from this place, Pergiata, Umaya the Yumsas, and the water of this place, the Yumsas, it caused the 10 tribes to lose themselves and follow after it, and they became so hedonistic that they lost their place in Yisrael. Because these are such great pleasures, the wine from this place and the water from this place. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach Iklu Hasam. The story is told of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, one of the great sages, who went to these places to get the wine and the water. Imshach Basrael, and he got caught up in it, and he stayed there to get as much as he could. And he forgot his learning. Ki hadar, when he came back, Asakam Lamikri and Besafra, he tried to read the Torah, and he wanted to begin in Parshas Bo, the first of the mitzvahs of the new moon, and there it says HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. This new moon shall be for you the renewal. However, he mixed up the Dalid with a Resh, so he read Hacheresh instead of Chodesh. Hacheresh means the deaf mute, and Hazeh, and he read as if the Zion was a Yud. Haya, so Hacheresh Haya Libam, and instead of Lachem, the Chaf he read as a base. Hacheresh Haya Libam, their hearts became deaf, and so he realized that this was telling him that he had lost his heart had lost its listening ear for Torah, and realized he made a mistake. He had the Chachamim pray for him that he should remember his learning. Bahad Talmud Eina came back. And this is what we learned in the Mishnah. Rab Naharaya Mer, have a girl makim Torah. Always go and study in a place where you have other Talmidei Chachamim there to study with you. So this way you can maintain your growth in Torah. You can't always rely. You can't rely on the Torah you've already learned. You must continue to grow in Torah at all times. Don't say, well, they'll follow me, or my students will teach me. Do not rely on your own wisdom. And we learned that even though this teaching is taught in the name of Rabbi Naharai, actually that's not his name. Naharai means the illuminator. That's not his name. Rather, his name is Nehemiah. And actually, it's actually Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. So why was his name? Why was he known as the illuminator? Because he would illuminate the eyes of the Chachamim with halacha. Avalam is garin. We saw further in the Mishnah you may not use a scraper to scrape off skin. So you're not allowed to use a scraper to scrape off on Shabbos. However, Shimon Gamliel says, however, if your feet are muddy or dirty, so then you're allowed to scrape it off typically. And there's no concern. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda, and in fact, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda, his mother made for him a skin scratcher made of silver. So you see that you're allowed to do it on Shabbos, and for Shabbos you made him a beautiful one, special for Shabbos. Ein Yarda Kurdima. It says you cannot go down to this place, Kurdima. My time. Well, what's the reason you can't go to this river? Mishum Pika, because the mud of that place is slippery, and you can slip, and then you fall in, and your garments will get wet, and then you're going to come out and just squeeze it. You also can't make this potion that causes vomiting. That's only if you're using a potion. But by hand, to induce vomiting, by sticking your finger down your throat, that would be permissible. However, Rabbi Nechemia says even on a weekday you shouldn't do it because you're causing loss of food, meaning you're causing yourself to vomit, and then you're going to be hungry again, and that's a waste. You're also not allowed to sort of massage the joints of an infant to get them in shape. In the name of you are allowed to massage and wrap a child, an infant on Shabbos. So they asked him, but we learned in our Mishnah that you're not allowed to fix the bones and massage his child. That's talking about trying to do a spinal alignment, sort of like a chiropractic on the child. That you're not allowed to do. That's structural work. But to just wrap the child and get their joints tight, that you're allowed to do. It also says in the Mishnah you're not allowed to fix a break, put the break back in place. Rab Chana Bagdata said, I'm a Shmuel, the name of Shmuel, and now we go to 148a. The halacha actually is that machzir as a shever, you are allowed to return and fix it and put it back in place. Rabbi Chana Ekla Pumbedisa. So Gemara tells a story where Rabbi Chana came to Pumbedisa, one of the great academies, was in the city in Babylon. And he didn't come to the academy on the day of teaching, the Rav Yehuda, where Rav Yehuda was teaching. So Shadrei la'adadaila, he sent the messenger from the academy, Abadaila, to tell him to come. Amalei zil garbi, to go and get him to come. If he doesn't want to come, bring his coat for him, and he'll follow. Also garbi, so he took his coat for him. Also ashkechei, and so he came. He followed suit. Rabbi Chana came to the academy. Ashkechei the Kadarish, and he heard of Yehuda teaching, like our Mishnah's text. You're not allowed to fix a break on Shabbos. He said, actually, Rabbi, the Reb Chana Bagdata said in the name of Shmuel, that you actually are allowed to, and that's the correct text of the Mishnah. This is what we have. We have Chana, our teacher, and Shmuel, our teacher, and I had not known this. Isn't it good? Isn't it correct that I had him bring your coat here so you can come here and correct us in this halacha? Thank you so much for coming. So we saw in our Mishnah somebody had a dislocated joint, and he can't go and pour cold water in it, which sort of worked as the tightening of the muscles, which pulled it back into shape, into the joint. So Rav Yosef came to Rav Yosef. He was in front of Rav Yosef, Shani Leyadi, and his hand was out of place. Amalei Hachamai, he said, in such a case, what's allowed? And he asked him a particular movement. Am I allowed to do this movement? He said, oh, sir, no, you're not. What about if I did such a movement with my arm? Is that permissible? Amalei Aser, he said, no, that too is prohibited. In the meantime, by showing him various movements with his arm and trying to get it, asking whether or not that's permissible, he ended relocating the joint into the joint. So what question do you have? Hatanan, we learned Mishnah for Kayode, somebody whose hand became dislocated, or raglo, or his arm. Don't put it into cold water to put it back. But he can bathe in a typical manner. He goes into cold water to bathe, and if it gets healed, it gets healed. But didn't we learn in our Mishnah that you're not allowed to fix a broken bone, and yet Rav Chana Bagdata said that the Mishnah's text is incorrect, and what really the correct text is that you are allowed to fix a bone. You think it's all been sewn with the same needle? Where Rav Chana Bagdata said that the text of Mishnah was incorrect, that's where Shmuel said it. But where Rav Chana Bagdata did not say it, so we can't just on our own say, well, the line beforehand was an incorrect text. So to here, we got to change the text? No, wherever it was said, it was said. Where it wasn't said, it wasn't said. With this, we complete the 22nd chapter of Shabbos, and we should come back to you, Bez Hashem, Perek Shabbos. We begin now the halachas of borrowing on Shabbos. You ran out of salt, you need some salt. You ran out of potatoes, what do you do with the raw potato? But you ran out of challah, you want to borrow a challah, etc. So you run to the neighbor, and you want to say, can I borrow X, some salt? So you're not allowed to say that, because borrowing means a loan. A loan means you write it down to remember who has to pay. And writing is prohibited on Shabbos. So you can't say borrow. Rather, you say, can I have? So that there's a difference in the language between halveni, lend me, and shoel, can I ask for? Okay, so shoel you can ask for jugs of wine, shemen, or oil, as long as they don't say lend it to me. Or a woman can borrow from a friend some breads. Now, but if you don't trust that it's going to be paid back, so you're allowed to say, here, take my kerchief, take my garment, whatever it may be. I'll leave that with you, and that is the collateral left, so that you have what to collect against. And then you calculate what the value of what I took was after Shabbos. Similarly, Pesach is on a Shabbos. Friday, meaning the Seder is Matzah Shabbos Sunday, so the Korban Pesach has to be done on Shabbos. The Shechita, since it must be done that way, we learned earlier, you're allowed to do it even on Shabbos. But the purchase of the lamb, it cannot be done on Shabbos. And somebody realizes, oh my goodness, I didn't buy the lamb yet. So he goes to a lamb dealer and says, can I have a lamb? I need to bring Korban Pesach. He can't say lend. He can't say sell. He says, can I have one? He says, yes. And we'll work it out. So that he can do. And he can say, here's my scarf. Here's my garment, whatever it may be. And you keep that and we'll work it out. He takes his Korban Pesach. And after Yantav, he can work out what he owes him. Amalei Rabba bar Rav Chana l'Abaye. So Rabba Rav Chana said to Abaye, Maishna hashileni, Maishna halveni. What distinction is there by lend to me versus can I ask of you? Amar le hashileni le'asa l'michtav. When you say the word she'ela, that term does not seem as a loan, and therefore you wouldn't just write it down. And we're not concerned that you're going to write it. Helveni is a loan. I'll say l'michtav, you're going to write it. And when it says but the vernacular is such that sometimes you say she'ila instead of halva'a. You use their interchangeable terms in the vernacular, even though that legally one may have a different term than the other. So it may be that when you're talking to your lawyer, you're going to use one term. You'll say, no, that's the incorrect term. You're going to use the other. But in the vernacular, people use either one. Even on a weekday, somebody may say, can I have some salt? Can I borrow some salt? Will you lend me some salt? Either way, it's going to be interchangeable. And people are not concerned about it. And therefore, people think of, even though you use the word she'ila, but people are going to think of it as halva, as a loan, and they're going to come to write. So therefore, you're going to write on Shabbos. We skip the parentheses. Since you're specifically only allowed to use this term on Shabbos. But he's not allowed to use the term lend me this. Min kura milza, it's recognizable to people, and they're going to say, oh, the reason he said it that way is because I'm not allowed to write down the loan. And they remember not to write. A further statement from Rabbi Rachana to Abaye. We know that whatever you can change and on Yantif, that's permissible, but you're going to change it a little. So to do it in an abnormal way is good as best. So that's great. Hani nashi the malyan tzvayu mayam. So when people go out to the well to get water, and it says women because that was what was typical. So when somebody goes out to the water to get to the well to get water, why don't they make any changes? Mishum deli efsha, because what kind of change can you make? Because actually every change you make is going to be harder in another aspect. Hey, what should they do? If they're bringing big barrels or big jugs to fill, you want them to take a bunch of smaller jugs. They're going to have to go back and forth more times, and that's more difficult in the walking back and forth. And if this person is typically using a small jug, let them use a larger jug. That also is going to be a problem. It's harder and heavier, and they're carrying more. And now we turn to Kuf Mem Ches Amud Beis. Nifram Sudra, and if you want to cover it with a kerchief, we're concerned that maybe it's gonna get wet, and then they're gonna squeeze out the water. Nechasi ben nichtama, and you want it to be covered by this cloth. Zilman the mifsik ve'asi lemiktere. Maybe it's going to this cover is going to tear. It's going to break the rope and the twine, and you're going to make a knot in it, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition. So whatever you're going to do, there is no real good change, and so we just say do it as typical. Hilkach le'yafsha. Another statement of Rabbi Bar Chana to Rabbi Bar Chana to Abaye. Tanan lemafsike lemasapkim lematafkel lemaraktim yontiv. On yontiv, you're not allowed to dance or clap or bang. Rashi says the banging is out of at a funeral. Tosa says no, that's not the context here. It's all out of joy and singing. You're not allowed to do that on account of that you may come to fix to pull out a musical instrument and fix it and tune it. We said, but wait, if you look around, you'll see people constantly dancing and singing and clapping. We don't say anything to them. So he says, well, by that reasoning, this is what Rava said, in the front of an alleyway that has 3 walls. So you're allowed to carry within there if you would make either a vertical post on the side or a horizontal post across. Now, a horizontal post is a big beam, so that's visible. But the vertical post you may not notice. So you may not know exactly where the demarcation of the end of the alleyway is. So Rava said, don't sit and play with something at the entrance to the alleyway right there, because it may go beyond the place and you're going to come and bring it back and carry from a public domain to private domain. Maybe you're going to bring it. But you see people sitting at the end of the alleyway all the time and playing there. And we don't tell them anything. So he said, no. The reason is, Ella hanach lehem liYisrael. Let Bnei Yisrael do what they do. Mutav sheyashogigin. It is better that they do what they do and be mistaken about something. Rather than you tell them to stop and they're not going to accept it, and then they're going to be intentionally transgressing. So at first, Rabbi Bar Chana thought that this is only going to be said in a rabbinic prohibition. But by a Torah prohibition, you got to tell them because they're going to transgress a Torah prohibition. But that's not true. Regardless of if it's a Torah prohibition or not, still only tell it to someone who is going to listen and likely to change. But if somebody is going to continue making that mistake, don't change it. Don't tell them, because it's better that they are unintentionally transgressing than intentionally. The Tosefes the Yom Kippur and the Araisi, because the additional time of Yom Kippur is a Torah obligation. As we'll see when we learn Yuma, there's an obligation to not start Yom Kippur just at the beginning, at nightfall, but rather in the 9th day of Tishrei already to begin the fast and begin the Kedusha of Yom Kippur. And yet you see people eat and drink up until the deadline. Nobody tells them anything. So you see, even though that it's a Torah obligation to bring in Yom Kippur early, nevertheless, people drink to the line and nobody says anything. So you see that even in a Torah obligation or a transgression, you don't say anything unless you know that the person is going to be able to accept that. Tomorrow morning, we'll continue here with Kuf Mem Ches on base 148B. Shavua Tov. Thank you for joining. See you in just a few hours.